Dr. Matthew Phillips, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Paul.
Mate, we met at the Future of Medicine conference, organized by people or somebody that people will be familiar with, because Grant has been on my podcast 3 times, I think, and you gave a cracking talk, as you did last year, about metabolic therapies for cancer and other lifestyle diseases. But you call yourself a metabolic neurologist. And when I heard that, I'm like, that's so cool. Let's start with the neurologist bit. So just let our listeners know, what does a neurologist do and what's the training pathway look like?
So neurologists are medical doctors who specialize in the brain, but there are other specialties like psychiatry and psychology that also do that. So what a neurologist does is we actually specialize in certain disorders of the brain, what happens when things go wrong. So stroke, epilepsy, Parkinson's, multiple sclerosis would be common disorders. And we try and diagnose which of these disorders a person might have when they come in with a certain set of symptoms. It's not always straightforward. And then once you make that diagnosis and you've spoken with the patient about it, then you try and implement some kind of treatment. And most of our treatments that we learned about in medical school are medications, sometimes surgery, but usually it's a drug-based approach. And a metabolic neurologist is a phrase that I termed. A metabolic neurologist is okay with using drugs, but they're plan B, because I don't believe drugs inherently improve our health. A metabolic neurologist aims to improve the health of the brain and nervous system in addition to using the drugs to help in other ways. But the main game for a metabolic neurologist would be improving brain and nervous system and muscle health.
And where does, so a couple of questions just on the neurology bit. How long's the training pathway before you are a bona fide, out of the box neurologist, often running on your own?
Yeah, it depends on the country you train in. So I trained in Australia and where you are, and I did it as fast as you could. And that was 4 years of medical school, plus 1 year internship, plus 3 years of general training, where you train in several specialties such as cardiology, kidney medicine, neurology, and so on. And then another 3 years of neurology. So that would be medical school 4 years plus 7 years for the full neurology training, 11 years. That's an absolute minimum. Most people do it longer than that in Australia.
Wow, 11 years. And one question before we dive into the metabolism thing, where in the nervous system do you stop working, right? So brain, central nervous system, when it gets to peripheral, do you go all the way to there, or is there a point where you hand over to another specialist?
No, that's a good question, Paul. So neurologists manage the brain, so the central nervous system and the peripheral nervous system. The central is the brain and spinal cord, more or less. The
Mm-hmm.
peripheral is the motor nerves, motor neurons, I should say, and all the peripheral nerve complexes, such as the plexuses and the nerves themselves. But we also deal with the junction between the nerves and the muscles, and we treat most of the muscle disorders too.
Right.
So pure muscle disorders do occur, and we treat most of those. Rheumatologists do deal with those to an extent as well. So we sort of share the muscles.
Yeah, cool. And then probably the exercise physiologist would step in at some point or work with you guys at some point for certain muscle disorders, I'm guessing.
Yes, yes, for certain muscle disorders. So we would be more traditionally would be more involved in the diagnostic problem. So what is the muscle disorder? And then we would get other people like that to help with the sort of treatment aspect, because a very good thing, as you probably would know, for most muscle disorders, regardless of cause, is to get the muscles moving and
Yeah.
exercise, proper exercise protocols and so on.
Yeah, cool. So tell me, when did you first become interested in metabolism as a route for you to explore?
I think at a very young age, I at least age 17, 18, when I started I started university at age 17, and I specialized in evolutionary biology initially, and that my courses gradually morphed. I started choosing courses in biochemistry and physiology more. And I never thought about this at the time. I just thought it was more interesting inherently. And I was learning about animals and plants and fungi and invertebrates and microorganisms and so on. So I was more interested in how life worked at a basic sort of biochemical and physiological level. And so I actually did my first degree in evolutionary biology with a strength, with an emphasis on biochem and physiology. And then I did a 2-year master's in biochem and physiology in fish, of all things. And then I did that 4-year medical degree a couple of years later. So I think it must have started at least age 17, 18. I just wanted to know how life worked. And
Yeah.
metabolism, in my opinion, is how life works.
Yeah, yeah, no, very, very interesting. And it's interesting that you say that. I interviewed a guy a couple of weeks ago. I'd read his paper, right? I'll tell you who he is in a second. You probably know him. I'd read his paper, and it was all about fructose, but it went back to the great apes and the whole evolution of the great apes and the uricase gene and a certain variant in that. And I'm reading this and thinking, this guy's got to be and have a background in evolutionary biology. And then I spoke to him, and he did. His name is Professor Richard Johnson. Wrote a paper on the fructose survival hypothesis, and basically how our inability to process large amount of fructose drives obesity, diabetes, a whole host of neurodegenerative disorders, but does it through impacts on the mitochondria. So there's two people who started their careers as evolutionary biologists and ended up in chronic disease, because it's bloody important, right? Isn't it? And as you say, all life comes down to metabolism.
Yeah, I think the advantage of evolutionary biology is whenever there's a question, a problem, anything, you got to address it from a why and a how perspective. Why does it work that way, and how does it work? So, metabolism is the how, but evolutionary biology sort of provides a big picture evolutionary framework as to why. And so I guess for me, combining evolutionary biology with biochem and physiology and metabolism in general was awesome for the reason that it combined the why and the how. And
Mm.
I guess I see a lot of people address things from a why perspective, but not a how. And I think a lot of people address things, a lot of scientists address things from a how perspective, but not a why.
Yeah.
So you've got to have both, I think. And if both offer explanations, that's powerful.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. So that leads us really nicely into, I read one of your papers on metabolic strategies in healthcare, and you got this cracking diagram in there that compares a hunter-gatherer lifestyle versus the modern lifestyle, right? And I'll give the overview, and then I'll get you to explain this to people. So as you point out, that hunter-gatherer lifestyle, we had infrequent blunted feeding and anabolism, that muscle growth. So there was infrequent plateaus in blood glucose, insulin, IGF-1, mTOR, all of that. And we had frequent pronounced periods of fasting and catabolism, right, which activated certain pathways, ketones, AMPK, serotins, and PGC1 alpha. But then, and that has a positive impact on the mitochondria. But then this modern lifestyle where we're just eating heaps and we're not fasting at all, and we're in this constant fed state, impacts the mitochondria negatively. So can we just do a dive into that and give us an overview from that evolutionary biology and the metabolism and the impacts on mitochondria?
Sure. So I guess we're looking at a very long period of time, 2 to 3 million years, and that's important. So for most of our evolution, humans and our earlier relatives were hunter-gatherers. And we've only been sort of agriculturalists for the last 5 to 10,000, maybe 15,000 years. So it's sort of 1% of our total evolutionary
Mm.
time. And then of that agricultural time, only in the last 50 years have we had this really ultra processed modern dietary lifestyle. We're eating many times a day, and it's a lot of processed carbs. So what that paper was trying to say is that mitochondria health was probably a lot better as hunter-gatherers, and it's probably pretty poor today. And that my argument is that most of the lifestyle disorders today, which you can categorize into 4 categories, is due to mitochondria biology being impaired.
Yeah.
So if you want to look at the hunter-gatherers, they would have eaten once or twice a day. Sometimes they wouldn't have eaten at all. And so they, food was not reliable. So they did a lot of fasting. If they weren't able to do that, then, they would have died out. So everyone's ancestors, hunter-gatherer ancestors, are used to fasting. And then they didn't have processed carbohydrates. If they did, it was in small amounts. It was not a staple in their diet. So if they had, evolved near the northern latitudes, it would have been meat almost exclusively. So no fiber, high protein, high fat, ketogenic diet. And then temperate zones would have been sort of low carb, a few more plant-based foods, but not too many. And then near the equators, you would have got low to moderate carb at most, low to moderate, not moderate. And this would be in your grasslands and savannas, and those people would have had more vegetables in their diet, but still meat-based as well. And they would have been low carb, but everyone would have been ketogenic for most of the time because of all the fasting.
Yeah.
So I would argue that's our natural state, is to be in ketosis. And now, from the modern dietary lifestyle, so too many meals a day and too many processed carbs, we are not in ketosis, we're in glucosis. So we're running mainly on glucose. And there are many mechanistic metabolism-based studies showing that ketones are a preferable fuel for the brain and nervous system and muscles.
Yep.
Compared to glucose, and that there are a number of benefits in having the body run to a significant degree on the ketone molecule rather than almost exclusively the glucose molecule, which almost everybody runs on.
And I think there's a bigger problem, isn't there, that when you're constantly running off glucose, there is no metabolic flexibility. So if you go for a period, then a sustained period without food, there's a big hunger drive that kicks in that makes you then want to eat. And our metabolism is not flexible enough to switch from glucose back to ketones, back to glucose, back to ketones. That
Definitely
becomes an issue, doesn't it?
Yeah. So our hunter-gatherer ancestors would have been in ketosis most of the time, not all the time. So, if they came upon a large group of foods such as berries or something like
Yep.
that, then they would throw themselves out of ketosis for a little while. So that ability to switch, that's called a metabolic switch, coined by Dr. Mark Mattson, between ketosis and glucosis is important. And yeah, we've probably lost that because most people are just running in glucosis all the time. So I'm trying to apply ketogenic strategies to people with neurological disorders, and I want them to be in ketosis all the time because they have a bad disorder. But if you have reset your metabolic health and you don't have a disorder, it's probably best to be in ketosis most of the time, but be able to do that switch periodically, as you say. Because if you're in ketosis all the time, your body's going to adapt to that, and then if you do have a carbohydrate hit, your body may not be so good at handling it on a metabolic level.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's dive in. Let's do a deep dive into the mitochondria.
Yep.
So let's talk through people. What are the mitochondria? How many of our cells in the body have mitochondria in the first place, roughly? What roles do the mitochondria play in cellular health? Because it's massive oversimplification to say that they're just the batteries of our cells, right? They do a lot more than that.
Yeah.
And then what are the implications of that? So let's take that in order about what do our mitochondria do, and how pervasive are they in cells? Like, is there certain class of cells that don't have mitochondria
So if you look at the evidence objectively, in my opinion, the mitochondria are these organelles, so very small structures that live within almost all cells except red blood
Red
cells.
blood cells, yeah.
Yeah. And which is interestingly the kind of cell I studied as a master's student in fish.
Right.
But yeah, because they actually start out with mitochondria, they just lose them early on.
Ah.
So they're in pretty much all cells except red blood cells in people. And the mitochondria are, there's maybe a few hundred or a few thousand in each cell, depends on the cell. And they sort of are these organelles, these little structures that exist within the cells, and they can change their shapes. They often look like bean-shaped things, ellipsoids, but they can become long and skinny. They can become fat and round. They can actually become many other shapes. And their shape depends on the cell type they're in to an extent. So certain mitochondria exist in certain cells in certain different forms. What they do, I think, yes, they produce most of the energy for the cell, but that is only one thing that they do. As you say, there's several dozen actually things they do. I think in a big picture sense, what they do is they coordinate the cell function
Mm.
largely. It is actually the mitochondria that are determining how the cell operates, and therefore mitochondria, in my perspective, that coordinate metabolism, most of metabolism, and therefore mitochondria are the key determinants of a person's health.
Mm.
And what other things do they do other than produce energy? So they have a very large influence on how the genetic code in the cell is expressed and how it is certain genes are turned on and turned off. That's called epigenetics. They are strongly involved in the production of messengers that go between cells, such as hormones. And these are things that take messages outside of, from one organ to another or between cells. They are involved, this is very important, in producing free radicals or reactive oxygen species. Mitochondria are the main source of that by far. And I think you have to have a little bit of reactive oxygen species produced, but too much is
Mm.
bad. And we know that in the lifestyle disorders, all of them. So when I say lifestyle disorders, I basically mean type 2 diabetes, heart disease, like the atherosclerosis, cancer, and neurodegenerative disorders such as Alzheimer's.
Yeah.
Reactive oxygen species are too high in all of those. And so that the mitochondria are there's something wrong with the mitochondria there. But low amounts of reactive oxygen species are good. They're useful as signaling. They have signaling functions.
Mm.
The mitochondria are also involved in producing heat for the body. So there are, I could literally mention dozens of different activities and functions and things that they do, but I think it's important to recognize, basically, to sum it up, that mitochondria coordinate cell metabolism to a very large degree.
Mm.
We tend to think of cells as being the fundamental units of the body, and that the mitochondria are just adjuncts to the cell, one organelle amongst several others. However, I don't take that view anymore. That's what I learned in my biology courses. But now I believe that and it's belief based on substantial evidence that uh, mitochondria are the fundamental units of metabolism. And if you improve their functions and activities, their biology in general, you're going to have a very good impact on cell metabolism, organ metabolism and function, and the health of the body.
Yeah, and this is what most people really don't think about, is that we are just an ecosystem of
Yeah,
cells, and when you get cellular dysfunction, the main driver of that being mitochondrial dysfunction, then you are going to get disease. It's as simple as that.
absolutely.
And it doesn't, but it doesn't happen overnight, does it, Matt? It's like this
Not at
stuff
all.
takes years and decades sometimes for this to manifest.
Definitely. I mean, you can look at these lifestyle disorders, these four categories that I mentioned. They take years or decades to develop. As you say, they don't tend to happen overnight. Some of them, like a person can become type 2 diabetic rather quickly
Mm.
if they eat the very wrong things, and have a lot of stress and don't sleep and so on, you can do that. But then in that case, it can be reversed rather quickly too.
Yeah.
So because the mitochondria haven't undergone a substantial, huge amount of damage. So yeah, these things take a long time to develop. And I think the longer they develop, the harder it would be to improve the health of the mitochondria. The mitochondria
Mm,
do have this ability to recover to a very large degree. And that's why I'm really interested in the fasting in particular. But it probably declines as we age, like many things. And
yeah.
so maybe not wholly, but it probably isn't as efficient in someone who's 80 as opposed to someone who's 40.
And that's an important part because the repair process is going to be less effective as you age because there are many systems that are naturally declining in the body as well, right? So
Yeah,
early intervention is pretty bloody key if you can do it.
it would be. But that being said, what I'm trying to do is so prevention is absolutely key. But I'm trying to focus on therapy for people with
Yeah,
established neurological disorders. Of course,
yeah.
most of them are a bit older, so it's more challenging. But yeah, you'd want if you want if you started these things early in life, then of course, you're going to optimize your health earlier. And really, if you have optimal mitochondrial function, what I say in that paper is you shouldn't develop most cancers. You
Mm,
shouldn't develop most neurodegenerative disorders. You shouldn't develop type 2 diabetes. And you shouldn't really, and that's a big one to say, but you should not develop most forms of heart disease.
mm,
So there are genetic causes of each of these things that would still develop. So, and I'm not talking about type 1 diabetes either, but so type 1 diabetes, this wouldn't potentially be that good at stalling, but it might help it. But the things like Alzheimer's and cancer, 5% of them or so are genetically based. Will it help them? I think it would help, but would it stop or stall them? I'm not sure.
yeah,
But I
sure.
think if you focus on your mitochondrial health, you will probably be able to prevent a lot of these things. My
Yeah.
research is focused on therapy.
And when you say neurodegenerative diseases, do you include psychiatric disorders in that? Because I've been reading a book, a Harvard psychiatrist, his name escapes me at the minute, and
That's
it's
Chris
all
Palmer.
yes, it's all about the mitochondria's
Yeah, yeah,
role in psychiatric disorders.
yeah. So that would probably be Brain Energy by
Yes,
Dr.
brain
Chris
energy.
Palmer.
That's the
Yeah.
one. That's the one.
Yeah, so it's different. So the main four neurodegenerative disorders would be Alzheimer's disease, Parkinson's disease, amyotrophic lateral sclerosis, or motor neuron disease. ALS is the most common form of motor neuron, and
Yeah.
Huntington's. So each of those disorders does come with psychiatric features. So a person develops things like mood disorders such as
Yeah.
anxiety, depression, so on, but also they can get neuropsychiatric features, hallucinations, delusions, and so on, things that Chris would see in his patients. But um, I wouldn't count other disorders. Generally other disorders such as schizophrenia and so on are seen as more psychiatric,
Yeah.
strongly psychiatric, whereas the neurodegenerative disorders are characterized by a very slow decline, multiple systems involved, their whole body disorders. Just the neurons take the greatest hit because they have the most mitochondria, and the mitochondria are the problem in those disorders. So the neurons get a lot worse than others, but other things get affected in all of them, like the heart, the muscles, the skeletal muscles are affected in all these disorders, many internal organs as well. So they are more likely to occur in much older people, and they occur they proceed very slowly, and they are defined by different criteria, but psychiatric features can be a part of all four.
Right. Yeah. Okay. So there's definite distinction. So let's maybe look at those categories and the main drivers of those categories and how metabolism, particularly the mitochondria, is involved in them. So and we'll just spend a few minutes on each one. So type two
Sure.
diabetes. Let's go through. I mean, it's still for me really frustrating. I read research the other day talking about red meat. This came out of Harvard.
Yeah,
Red meat causing type 2 diabetes. And I'm just like, freaking
it's
really?
extremely frustrating. Yeah, I mean, when someone says that, they're quoting a observational study that
Mm.
correlates red meat with type 2 diabetes in someone. But the cardinal rule of of interpreting scientific studies is there are two kinds: observational, interventional. Observational is where you just watch two groups and you don't intervene with any kind of treatment and see what happens. And you can derive correlations. So red meat might be associated with type 2 diabetes, but you could say, well, the red meat caused the type 2 diabetes, or the type 2 diabetes caused the person to eat more red meat. Or more likely, there's a third factor that we don't know about that's produced the correlation that isn't even being described in the study.
Mm.
Interventional studies like clinical trials, randomized trials, which is what I focus on pretty much exclusively, is where you take a group of people and you change nothing except one thing, a treatment, and you give it to them, and then you watch them. You measure whatever the outcome of interest is, and then you measure again at some point in the future. And if it changed and everything else stayed the same except for the one thing you changed, you know that caused it.
Yeah.
So they're much better at showing causation. And so the red meat thing has no interventional causative evidence behind it whatsoever at all. And the simple fact is people who eat, there are many other explanations. People who eat a lot of red meat tend to eat, guess what? A lot of fried foods,
Process.
carbohydrates.
Yeah.
They tend to drink beer, alcohol. They tend to have unhealthy aspects of other parts of their life. So there are so many other things, and it's quite frankly disingenuous and false to proclaim that red meat causes type 2 diabetes or cancer or whatever it may be. All you can say is red meat is associated with that, and then you have to think deeper. But most people don't want to think too deep. They want a superficial quick fix for things, and this is the problem. And unfortunately, it afflicts a lot of medical doctors as
Yeah.
well. That kind of
And
thing.
by extension, Matt, sorry, with the red meat thing
There you go.
comes the saturated fat by extension, right? But
Yeah.
and look, my listeners will be familiar with the idea that in every other branch of science, observational studies are used solely to generate hypothesis.
Yep.
But only in nutritional sciences have we created large-scale dietary advice based on really poor and in some cases really poorly designed observational studies. So let's get into what, like, the number one, what does the evidence say around the interventions for type 2 diabetes? And secondly, can you just go into the causal role of mitochondria in type 2 diabetes and basically what's driving stuff going on here?
Okay, so I guess I'll start with the causal rule first and then the evidence.
Sure.
Maybe that's a better way to address it. So type 2 diabetes is a disorder of, I guess, insulin resistance. So insulin is the hormone that tells glucose to go into cells, and the cells become resistant to that hormone, and then the glucose levels go up in the blood. And so a lot of doctors focus on the glucose levels, but not the insulin resistance. And so you've got to think, why do the cells become insulin resistant? And in type 2 diabetes, it's a lot of muscle cells and fat cells, mainly. It's not so much the brain or the liver, but they can be involved. So my perspective is that the cells are becoming insulin resistant. I'm just going to come out, you can debate this, but straight shooter. I think the insulin resistance is largely a protective mechanism to prevent the cells from getting overwhelmed with excess glucose. Why? Because when excess glucose comes into the cell, the mitochondria end up having to deal with a lot of the effects of that. The glucose undergoes a series of metabolic reactions, leading to a lot of activity in the mitochondria on their electron transport chain. And you get this thing called electron overflow, and a lot of the free radicals get produced, tons. That's not good for the mitochondria or the cell because they're very damaging over time. So in order to prevent this whole thing, the cell becomes insulin resistant, probably coordinated by the mitochondria, and then the glucose levels go up in the blood. What do we do in medicine is we give drugs or insulin, usually insulin, to try and overcome this insulin resistance and force the glucose into the cells. And what the cells end up doing is they say, I don't want this glucose. They increase their protective mechanism even more. and become more insulin resistant. So then the patient sees the doctor the next year, more insulin prescribed typically. So you get this seesawing elevation of this sort of tug of war between insulin resistance and insulin, I guess. So
Yeah.
at some point, you know, you get that's not tenable. It can't be sustained. So what the body does, pretty early on, but gets worse and worse, is it takes a lot of this extra glucose in the blood and it converts it into fat and stores the fat in
Yeah.
your throughout your body. And that's okay for a while. Some people are better at it than others. If it's under the skin, subcutaneous fat, it's
Yep.
okay. But unfortunately, some people don't do that so well, and it gets stored in their organs. That's visceral fat.
Visceral
That's
fat.
really
Yeah.
not okay. So this view basically ties together type 2 diabetes with obesity, and it sees both type 2 diabetes and obesity as a metabolic response to the problem, which is mitochondria damage and dysfunction. The mitochondria are just trying to save themselves from the glucose onslaught. And the ultimate trigger of it, of course, is too many meals a day and too many processed carbohydrates, putting things very simply. In terms of evidence, there's dozens of randomized controlled trials, those really good interventional trials, showing that type 2 diabetes can be severely mitigated and often reversed with fasting or ketogenic diet
Mm-hmm.
protocols.
Yep.
And unfortunately, most of these studies are a few weeks or a few months long. There are some that are 1, 2, 3 years long. They're not randomized trials, the ones that are over a year, but they are good clinical trials. So the evidence is fairly robust. And um, I guess I'll leave it at that. But that's how I see type 2 diabetes and obesity and how they are tied together. That basically the body's eliciting a protective response, which is type 2 diabetes, and a protective response, which is obesity. And if those things continue, the protective responses become very maladaptive.
Yeah, and also I think, Matt, just to dive a little bit deeper and jump in at any stage here, that when the mitochondria are producing excess free radicals, we get oxidative stress, which affects many tissues. We get increased levels of inflammation. And then you pointed out the visceral fat. We know that inflammation can encourage visceral fat. And as some of our listeners will be aware, that visceral fat is metabolically different to all fat in the rest of your body, in that it is an endocrine organ essentially, and it produces adipokines that then trigger more inflammation. So we get this real metaflammation. You get like high levels of inflammation, which is just toxic for everything in the body, right?
Absolutely. And then you can ask, well, how do the other three disorders arise? The sort of atherosclerosis, cancer, and neurodegenerative disorders. So it would be depending on which tissue type is getting the most free radical production, the most inflammation, and there might be other things in there. It's not just diet that can
Mm,
damage the mitochondria. Many of the things depends on the disorder. Then certain tissue type might get affected more. So if it's your blood vessels, you're going to be more prone to the heart disease things. If it's a certain organ, you might be prone to cancer in that organ. And if it's the neurons in the brain, you'll be more prone to a neurodegenerative disorder.
mm.
So I think it's a very comprehensive, universal approach theory at looking at health and what are the main disorders today and what do we do about them. In order to do something about them, you have to have a theory that fits an evolutionary framework and a
Yeah.
metabolic mechanistic framework, which is what that paper is all about,
Mm,
that describes how all these things arise. And I'm sure there will be small errors here and there, but
mm.
I think the big picture theme is solid. And I put a lot of thought into that, and I guess it addresses a lot of things.
Yeah, and I think also plays in with Richard Johnson's stuff around fructose, and
Sure.
how his paper showed that the fructose survival switch basically unites the insulin theory of weight gain and diabetes, the energy balance theory, and even the protein leverage hypothesis, all play into this fructose survival hypothesis, that fructose drives down ATP in the mitochondria, which then creates a metabolic crisis that makes you eat more, then you store more fat, and all the things that you talked about earlier on. But
Yeah.
what I didn't know until I interviewed him is that we can essentially create fructose in the body and the brain from excess carbohydrates. So having a high carbohydrate diet in itself, even if you're not consuming fructose, you can actually make fructose that activates this metabolic switch, or this survival switch, that then creates mitochondrial dysfunction and the need to eat more, and then it just goes on. And he talked about some really elaborate study where they actually put a glucose clamp on, and in the brain saw there was actually fructose production in the brain from just having glucose, which is really interesting, right?
Yeah, he's focusing more on the fructose. I would, in a
Broaden it.
general picture, get glucose and fructose. Fructose, it's got serious problems because the liver has to metabolize most of that. So it's really especially harmful in the liver. But yeah, those are good points.
Yeah. Now, so let's talk about cancer. So give us the perspective of the role of mitochondria metabolism in general in cancers, and then we can just do a bit of a dive into the metabolic therapy for cancers, and then we'll come back and talk about neurodegenerative diseases.
Yes. Okay. So looking at it evolutionarily, again, first and foremost, the mitochondria sort of control the cell and coordinate when it divides and when it doesn't. If they're damaged, then that control is lost. And the cell has a choice. It either dies because the mitochondria also produce energy and do all these other things. It can either die, which probably happens most of the time. But if the mitochondria are damaged and the cell is able to activate another plan B for getting energy to survive, it will do that. Some cells can probably do that, and they become cancerous ultimately. That plan B is a very old mechanism centered on something called the Warburg effect, whereby the cell basically says, okay, the mitochondria are damaged. And this is controversial, but this is my take. The mitochondria are damaged. We need another way to produce energy. And we're going to ramp up this other reaction called, fermentation, which is basically using glucose outside the mitochondria in the cell, but outside the mitochondria in the cytosol to produce energy. It's not very efficient, but these cells upregulate it by like 10, 20, 100 times, something crazy. And so they become, in the words of Sam Apple, who wrote a book on this, ravenous for glucose.
Right.
So that is what I think happens in cancer. So your mitochondria are damaged, but not completely out of the picture. They can probably still limp along. It would depend on the cell. Some they might be totally damaged. Some they might just be a little damaged. But having lost control of cell functions to a degree, the cell resurrects this plan B. And the plan B evolutionarily is the way that cells used to operate before they incorporated mitochondria in evolution, which happened, 1 to 2 billion years ago. So that's my view of cancer, is that that's the evolutionary explanation, and then the mechanistic explanation is the Warburg effect, and what do we do about that? So the answer, if those are right, and they may not be, is to implement fasting and ketogenic diet protocols perhaps in addition to your standard treatments, because the fasts and keto diet are going to, first of all, choke glucose availability for all cells in the body. Now, the normal cells are okay with that, with their good mitochondria. They'll just switch, as you say, they'll switch to using ketones, which mitochondria can use happily. But the cancer cells with damaged mitochondria aren't able to do that very well, if at all. So they have to rely on glucose. So they've got one fuel they can use. They're inflexible metabolically. And so a fast and a keto diet that drops glucose levels is going to make life a bit hard for them. But the second thing is, when you do a fast, especially a fast, maybe a keto diet to an extent, but definitely a fast, normal cells sort of slow down their growth or stop, and they become stress resistant, which includes chemo and radiation, whereas cancer cells keep growing. And so you enter this mode where you create a different, so it's called differential stress resistance, where the normal cells become more resistant to chemo radiation, but the cancer cells probably become more sensitive, if anything, because you've took their fuel supply. So this is why I use these things in people with advanced cancers. There's other reasons too, to see if we can help them live better and live longer.
Yeah, and I remember so two things on that, and then you can pick up the baton. I remember years ago, and I'm trying to remember his name, Dr. Joe somebody or other, who was a doctor for one of the NFL teams, but he was a cancer specialist as well, and he showed this MRI scan. This was at the Lifestyle Medicine Conference, I think. He showed an MRI scan of a one of his patients with an inoperable brain cancer, and you could see it was friggin' huge, and there was nothing that they could do. He put them on a ketogenic diet, and then and I think started off with a fast, and then showed a year later, completely and utterly gone. Right. The second thing I'll throw in, and again you can pick up the baton, was research from Walter Longo and his group around that fasting mimicking diet, because he again had showed that with cancer patients, you fast them, that the cancer cells become weakened, and that differential stress resistance you talked about, there's less impact with the chemo and the radiation. So just pick up either one of those, and I think with that cancer, with the brain thing, what was going on, and what have you seen with your own cancer patients, and by extension, are there certain cancers that seem to be more vulnerable to this fasting and ketogenic diet?
I don't think we have enough evidence to know which cancers might be more vulnerable. But the Warburg effect occurs in the vast majority of cancers, so all cancers, or most, should be vulnerable to a degree. We just need to build up the evidence more. In terms of brain cancer, it's always hard when someone mentions brain cancer because there's many different kinds.
Yeah.
So all I can comment on really is the kind of brain cancer I know very well, which is the worst one, glioblastoma. And that's the non-mutated glioblastoma. And that's the worst, bar none. So we're doing a clinical trial on that right now. So we've got a number of people who have entered this very intensive metabolic therapy program, 5-day fasts, every month or so for the first 10 months while they're on chemo and radiation. And when they're not doing the 5-day fast, they do this time-restricted ketogenic diet. So it's one meal a day, sometimes two, and it's a keto diet all the way. And so for the reasons I mentioned a few minutes ago, we're combining that with their standard treatments to see if we can give them a better life and a longer life. And yeah, we just need to give it more time. So I can say that things look encouraging, but I can't be definitive because that's why we're doing the trial, and I'm still enrolling people. We're almost there, but we have a few more to enroll. So I think there's a lot of optimism brewing around these approaches in most of these cancers. I can only really discuss glioblastoma well, though, and
Yeah.
I would say give it a couple more years and let's see how this trial goes, because this is the most intensive metabolic therapy program in the world, to my knowledge, for any disorder ever, actually.
And what was it like getting that through ethics?
It was it was difficult, but not as bad as one might think. I guess one of the
Because it was
advantages being
because it was an adjunct treatment that obviously you wouldn't have got it if it wasn't an adjunct treatment, I presume.
yeah, that's right. So initially, I did want to try it in people without the chemo radiation, and that was a little naive on my part, because even my most supportive oncologist said, "No way,
Yeah.
right? You can't. We're not ready for that." And they were right. They were right. We needed to do more work. So okay, so I decided to compromise and go combined approach with the standard treatments, and that was okay. So getting the ethics approval, I mean, one of the advantages of New Zealand is it's a small country, tucked, relatively isolated, and I guess it's in some ways there's a lot less controversy here than in a bigger country like Australia or the States or Canada, where I'm from, and and
I've always
so
said, mate, they are much more nimble across the ditch, and Aussies do not like to hear it.
interesting.
But I find that New Zealanders, if you look at it, they're light years ahead on many, many things.
Okay, well, you just summed it up, nimble. So yeah, I mean, it was still like a good 20-person ethics committee that hit me with a lot of questions when we tried to get the approval through. The idea of fasting, like quote unquote starving, although it's not starvation,
Mm.
advanced cancer patients is not appealing. at a superficial level. But once I explain it and mention, like the difference between fasting and starvation and intentional weight loss versus unintentional weight loss, and the theory underlying it, both from an evolutionary and metabolic perspective, yeah, it was okay. People were said that's reasonable, and I was very pleased to hear that. And I must say, I had the support of my oncology colleagues, which was invaluable. So they'd heard me talk about it enough to say, okay, well, maybe there's something to this, and we're willing to support a clinical trial.
And
So it
and
was hard, but not impossible.
I guess the difficulty with the fasting and even the ketogenic diet is that often people will lose weight just on a ketogenic diet.
Yeah,
And then you're doing a prolonged fast to introduce that metabolic switch and weaken the cancer cells. And often
yeah.
the issue with patients when they have cancer is that they do have, with rounds of chemo, a lot of weight loss. And that then becomes a limiting factor, doesn't it? That the frailty then really kicks in.
Yeah, oncologists are inherently wary of weight loss because it often indicates an adverse side effect from the chemo radiation, but often it indicates that the cancer is progressing and you've got systemic inflammation and cachexia and
Yeah.
muscle breakdown and so on. It's not good. But intentional weight loss is different. Um, there are a number of studies. For example, if you do bariatric surgery and have a ton of weight loss there, you actually have a much lower risk of many cancers
Mm.
subsequently. And there are many case reports and small studies showing that tremendous weight loss can be associated with excellent therapeutic outcomes in cancer, such as the one we did a few years ago with the young patient with the metastatic thymoma. So that's just one. So
Okay,
I was able to.
can you talk about that for a second? Are you happy to talk
Sure.
about certain case studies? Yeah, just give us
Yeah,
the
of
overview
course.
of that.
So just as an aside, that was a case study published about 5 or 6 years ago now, 4 years actually, 2020. And it was a young woman, 38 years old at the time, who presented with a stage 4 metastatic thymoma, so a huge tumor the size of a football in her chest. It's a rare kind of cancer, but it does happen, and it was very big. She was only able to have palliative chemotherapy, and her oncologist was very blunt and honest and said, "You probably have a year with palliative chemotherapy to survive." So she just serendipitously saw me a few weeks later because she also had myasthenia gravis, a neurological disorder that I was seeing her for. And she mentioned this. And so she had no options. She was really looking for other
Mm.
options. So I said, well, here's an option, a fasting keto diet protocol. So she did that for 2 years. And long story short, it was a difficult journey, but the tumor regressed by 96%.
Wow.
It almost vanished. Now, since then, I mean, I saw her just a few weeks ago. It's over 6 years now, and she's got a full quality of life. The tumor has grown back by a small amount, so it's probably about, I don't know, 30% of its original size, but it's stable and it's not bothering her at all. So it's nowhere near what it was, and it's stable. So, and she's got a good quality of life. So it's kind of like, you know, but if as long as we can control it at that level, great. And she's just doing. We stopped the big fasts a couple of years ago, and we just went with a sort of time restricted ketogenic diet. That's all she does now, and she's drug free. So as in no cancer drugs or anything. She's on a little bit for her myasthenia. So that has been an excellent outcome, and she's gone way past what her original prognosis was.
That I mean, that is just amazing. What's the reaction? I'm sure there's a varied amount of reactions among oncologists whenever they see that and read it.
Well, whenever you have a case report, it always can be viewed as a fluke,
Yeah,
right?
and it's
So
easy to
don't know
dismiss
what.
for those who are not
Yeah,
believers, right? They
yeah.
can just flick it off.
And this is what I did a recent podcast with Dr. Kim Berry. It was about a couple months ago now, maybe, but we spoke about beliefs at the beginning of that podcast, and basically what belief you bring to the table colors your perception of the data
Mm.
and what happened. So if you believe that for example, if you believe that a keto diet is good, any effects you see will be colored by that. And if you think a keto diet is bad, any effects you see will be colored by that. If you believe a certain person is good, no matter what they do, you'll interpret it in a good light. And if they think they're an evil person, no matter what they do, you'll interpret it in an evil light. And it's no difference here. So you have this incredible result. And if you believe that it was a fluke or that you don't understand it, and that you just say, oh, spontaneous regression occurs sometimes, and it does, then you'll look at it and go, okay, whatever. And of course, if you are well in tune with the metabolic theory of cancer and you're really interested in it, you'll look at that and go, holy smokes, you know.
Mm,
So I think the real thing to do is not to get emotional either way, not to let your positive or negative emotions control your perception of reality, is to just look at the evidence, at the data, and go, okay, this happened, 100% true. Why and how? Why and how? And uh, I guess I try to address those questions in the paper. I'm pretty confident, based on objective data, that the large fasts were the fulcrum of her improvement. I'm very confident of that.
mm.
Uh, we could debate why and how a little bit, but I think the evidence is very strong in that particular person. So that is why the long fasts are the fulcrum of my treatment approach to glioblastoma now. And all I can say is I still believe they're the fulcrum of therapy.
And
If metabolic works.
when you say long fast, what are we talking here? 7 days or more than that?
Fasting is there's two major kinds of fasting, prolonged and intermittent. So prolonged is anything over 2 days. Intermittent is essentially anything under two, but generally it would be like daily fasts of a certain number of hours.
Yeah, sure. Time restricted feeding.
Yeah.
Yeah. So was this one a prolonged, sustained fast in terms of a number of days? Is that the big driver of
Yeah.
it
So
rather
this
than the
young lady
intermittent?
did 7-day fasts every month for the,
Wow.
yeah, and she's not a big person. She's 40 something kgs. She's a very small person. So, kudos to her, 100%. But she did that every month for the first couple of years, and then she sort of tailored it off a bit, did one every couple months, and we decided that we just wanted to see how we would go with just the time restricted keto diet a year or two ago, and she's been okay on that. So
Okay.
yeah,
Yeah. We need more evidence, right? As you
we
say,
do.
to really understand the mechanisms. But I think that description of yours of looking at stuff without the emotion, that's what a scientist should do, right? But
Yeah,
unfortunately,
100%.
many don't. Um,
Yeah,
okay, so particularly in the world of nutrition, as you and I both know.
yeah.
So let's jump and talk now about neurodegenerative disorders. I mean, you mentioned a little bit earlier on, but just again, let's go over the causal role in your mind of metabolism and the mitochondria
Okay.
and some of the stuff you've seen from an intervention perspective.
So one of the interesting things about cancer and neurodegenerative disorders is that both involve significant mitochondrial damage and dysfunction. However, they're very different disorders. One is excess growth, the other is essentially a withering away.
Mm.
It's also interesting that cancer almost never afflicts the neurons. So the glioblastomas that I manage are the glial cells, the support cells around the neurons
Uh,
that become cancers, not the neurons. Neurodegenerative disorders almost only affect neurons. They can affect muscle sometimes. So inclusion body myositis, another case report we did a few years ago, that was a muscle degenerative disorder, but in general, it's neurons. So cancer and neurodegenerative disorders affect different cell types. Why? I think that so the mitochondria, when they're damaged in a non-neuronal cell, those cells tend to be very good, such as glial cells, at utilizing the plan B, the Warburg effect, the
right.
extra fermentation. Neurons are not good at it. They have way too many mitochondria. They're devoted to mitochondrial metabolism. They don't have the glycolytic machinery in order to utilize that second. So instead of going Warburg and showing excess growth and uncontrolled proliferation like a cancer cell would, the neurons just slowly die and degenerate. They degenerate and die in that order. So that to me is how you link those two evolutionarily, I guess, and mechanistically. Now,
Sorry, Matt, just to
that's
interrupt.
okay.
That I had no idea of that neurons, neuronal cells don't suffer from cancer, or cancer doesn't affect them. Is that never?
There are some pediatric tumors where that is the case, but those are probably genetically based. In
Yeah, yeah.
adults, yeah, in adults, it's extremely rare. It's other cells that become high level, aggressive cancers, not the neurons.
Right. That lends another smoking gun into the Warburg theory, does it not?
Well, it's an interesting. I think it's a fact that we have to be able to explain in any decent
Mm,
theory as to what causes cancer, what causes neurodegeneration. So that's my interpretation of it, and it's based on facts. Any interpretation is going to be open to conject, a little bit of speculation in that, but I
sure.
believe that's what's happening. So, um, yeah, so the approach is still the same. You're still trying to, as with cancer, you're trying to use fasting and ketogenic diet protocols to mitigate the mitochondria damage. And the fasting, which I didn't mention for cancer, one of the other mechanisms, the fasting might allow a lot of the mitochondria to recover, which would be important for both. So in neurodegenerative disorders, we're trying to do these things to get glucose down, to get ketones up. The ketones are a lot more, they can create more energy per amount of oxygen breathed in a neuron when these neurons are starved for their other energy source, glucose. The ketones produce fewer free radicals, so hence less damage to the mitochondria and the rest of the cell, the neuron. And you can get a simulation of certain growth factors that are very important in neurodegenerative disorders in order to maintain neural function. But most importantly, I
Is
think
that
it's about
sorry, Matt?
restoring the mitochondria.
Is that BDNF and VEGF? Do they play a role there, or is it other
Yeah,
growth
yeah,
factors?
yeah, both of them. Yeah, BDNF would be a big one. That's sort of like growth factor for neurons.
Yeah.
Yeah, brain-derived
So,
neurotrophic. Yeah,
so that ketosis increases BDNF.
correct.
Yeah, interesting. I'd seen actually a paper many, many years ago by Mark Matson,
Yeah,
and saying that ketosis can increase BDNF as
yeah.
kind of omega-3 fatty acids. Um, so then, look, I have seen myself, and I know I read a paper on your website about actual intervention studies, which we talked about earlier on, much higher forms of evidence that people with Alzheimer's disease, they go on a ketogenic diet, they get improvement in their symptoms, and you've seen the same with Parkinson's disease, and then ALS. I mean, you've done a case study, but we'll talk about that in a second. But
Sure.
just just give us a view of like how much evidence is there out there around those interventions, a ketogenic diet for improvement of symptoms of Parkinson's disease and Alzheimer's disease, in
Oh,
specific.
not very much. But the context of that is there's virtually no evidence for other diets in
Yes,
terms of
correct.
interventional
Correct.
studies, right? So people always say there's not very much evidence. That's true for a ketogenic diet or fasting protocol in these, yes, but there's even less for other things,
Mm.
including, what we often recommend to people as sort of the healthy diet that one should follow. So the evidence for Parkinson's, there's one small case study of I believe it was 6 or 7 patients that was done a couple of decades ago by Dr. Van Italy, and then there have been two randomized trials since then. One of which was the one we did in 2018 with a ketogenic diet versus a low-fat diet, and the ketogenic diet. They both showed improvements because I think the low-fat diet was pretty good in that trial, but the ketogenic diet showed more improvements, significantly greater improvements than the low-fat diet in the Parkinson's study. In terms of Alzheimer's, there are also, last time I checked, 3 major studies, so not many, but one of them was, again, a single-arm case clinical trial involving a handful of patients. I don't remember how many exactly. And then there was another one that was a randomized trial, but it included patients with mild cognitive impairment. So it was a mix of Alzheimer's and MCI, and MCI is a little different.
Yeah.
And then the third one was our one we did. It was just Alzheimer's. It was a crossover trial, so extremely powerful design. And again, we compared a ketogenic diet with a sort of the standard recommended diet, a healthy recommended diet, healthy recommended eating guidelines. And we looked at how those did. And again, the keto diet, we looked at 3 main outcomes, and the keto diet improved significantly better in 2 of those. I should mention with the Parkinson's and Alzheimer's study, the improvements we measured were not subtle. They were clinically significant too, not just
Mm.
statistically. So you can do a lot of fancy stuff with statistics, and a lot of scientific papers do this. They hire. I'm just going to come out and call a spade here, because it does irritate me. I have to say, although I'm not going to, let my emotions take control. So you can get high-paid statisticians to massage the data quite a lot, and eventually, you can't even understand what they did sometimes. And then they'll come out with a conclusion. Where I prefer to do studies where you just show what happened. You do some basic statistics. You get a statistician to use basic statistics. If they want to start doing transformations and things, I get nervous. I say, please don't do that. I want most people to be able to look at this and go, okay. And so we show that there was a statistically significant improvement, but also clinically significant. That means clinically significant is more important. It means it's obvious to someone who looks at a patient, the doctor, the patient themselves. So that's basically the brief synopsis of the evidence for keto diets in Alzheimer's and Parkinson's. In terms of fasting, it's much less. We're restricted to case reports in these conditions. And in terms of ALS and Huntington's disease, as far as I know, the only interventional studies done in either of those two disorders were are case reports done by our group again. And then we combined keto diet fasting protocols in both of those and showed, some pretty good improvements. And the ALS one was just published last week.
Yeah, and I read those on your website. I mean, that's friggin' amazing, really. I mean, you haven't called it, I'm going to call it. That was bloody amazing. That there was significant improvements in the outcomes, and I think that every research paper should be forced to, where it is relevant, not only talk about the statistics, but talk about the clinical outcomes, because often you see all this stuff and it talks about statistically significant. And as me and you know, there's a shitload, and you just alluded to it, there's a shitload of p hacking that goes on, which just for our listeners is that they'll just use statistics to try and find something after the effect, and then go and talk about that in their paper.
One thing is, if you get hundreds of thousands of patients in an interventional study, you only need there's so much, we call this statistical power, that you only need a tiny improvement to be statistically significant that will almost assuredly not be clinically relevant or significant, right? So if you get enough patients, you can get a statistically significant result that really doesn't mean much in reality, but get published in a nice journal because it was a huge study with lots of patients. I prefer to focus on small to medium-sized studies and have somewhat brave outcome measures, shall I say, but the ones that matter to the patients. And if you can show a statistically and clinically significant improvement in a group of 30 or 40 people, and you do the trial well, you do the study design is solid, that to me is far more powerful than a study of 1,000 people that showed a statistically significant difference, but it wasn't clinically significant to the patient, right? So that's my take, and other people will disagree, but I prefer to just have smaller studies that are designed well, and I'm limited by resources to an extent too. I don't have 20 hospitals behind me, and if you do them well and show a clinically significant difference, that's very, very encouraging in my opinion.
Yeah, for me, much more impactful than these statistical improvements that can often generate a lot of headlines, particularly when there are press releases that are created by either the university or the drug company behind that particular study, and doctors get convinced, right, as well as lay people. I just wanted to talk about now. I think we've covered things really extensively around the mitochondria. So in terms of you're focused on dietary stuff, because that's obviously massive. But when we think about general mitochondrial health, the area I come from, particularly around exercise, shows that exercise improves mitochondrial function. This goes way back to your paper on our hunter-gatherer lifestyle versus our modern lifestyle. And for me, it's an additive effect. One plus one is more than two, because our biology runs so much on movement, and movement will, if you're moving lots, will reduce the impact of it or delay the impact of a shitty diet, right? But you can never outrun completely a bad diet. But I think that when you have that sedentary lifestyle in with that, and as you said, lack of sleep, I think light plays a big role here. And particularly what I've really got into recently is red light and near infrared light and the impact on mitochondrial health. And to my absolute surprise when I dug into it, looking at for traumatic brain injury, other stuff around improvement in Parkinson's symptoms, Alzheimer's symptoms from red light. Are you across any of that stuff?
Just peripherally. So, I know about light therapy in general for these disorders, but it's not something I've dived into in any research capacity. But, mitochondria, I have a paper being reviewed right now, co-authored with Martin Picard, who's one of the mitochondrial experts in the world, I would say. And we took out that there are many roads to mitochondrial health. It's, as you say, not just dietary. But the way I see it is that the key mechanism to improving mitochondrial health is mitohormesis. And mitohormesis is where you subject mitochondria to a significant stress, but it's surmountable. And then after the stress, you give them a recovery period where they can change themselves so that they are better able to handle the stress the next time. And it's a seesaw between this active stress and this more passive recovery. And so for diet, it would be the eating phase and then the fasting phase. We often focus on diet and exercise a lot, but we forget about their polar opposites, fasting and recovery protocols.
Yeah.
So the exercise, if we go down to exercise, awesome, exercise, it's a stress. But remember, the exercise, like diet, is a challenge to mitochondria. It actually makes them weaker temporarily. It's the recovery protocol that matters. And so it is possible to fast too much and then enter starvation. It is possible to exercise too much and that becomes damaging. And we know that ultra athletes have worse health outcomes. We know that ALS, one of the strongest risk factors, is prolonged cardiovascular exercise, as is being sedentary. So, and then you can look at other therapies. You can look at other therapies that induce hormesis. There's
hot and cold temperature stuff,
exactly.
Right?
Yeah,
it's been shown to induce
I took
mitochondria.
a cold shower this morning. I take one every morning. I know you do too. And and then I have a hot bath. I jump into a hot bath, and I like that concept. Do I think it's the brunt of health? No, I'll be honest. I really think most people are going wrong with their dietary lifestyle, number one. But I don't. I absolutely agree with you that the lack of exercise and recovery protocol, the lack of cognitive stimulation and abnormal cognitive stimulation, and absolutely appalling sleep that people get.
Yeah.
So that's another one. Abnormal social interactions, so social media, things like that. And then, insufficient time alone, like forest bathing and spending time, just, mindfulness and meditating, just time alone. That's another one. So there are many of them. Hot, cold's another.
Yeah. And let's come back to hormesis, because our listeners will be very familiar with hormesis because I'm a massive fan of it, right? So and often talk about that hormetic curve and the fact that it is basically sublethal exposure to stressors or toxins, which at high levels can kill us, but at low to moderate levels induce stress resistance, right? So and one of the mechanisms by which they exert their effects is that they enhance protective genes, such as superoxide dismutase, catalase, glutathione peroxidase, these sorts of things. Independent of those increases in those stress antioxidant defense genes, is there any specific thing that is happening inside the mitochondria, that mitohormesis? Is it the HIF1 pathway that is being activated in mitohormesis?
Look, I take a big picture view with respect to the whole mitohormesis thing. Um, so I don't know much about that particular pathway. I'll be honest with you.
Right. So
I haven't heard.
you're not into the weeds in terms of the pathways, but just that we see that net benefit from that hormetic stressor.
Yes. So I guess there's so many different ways. There's so many ways to measure mitochondria parameters and health. Like you can look at ATP production as one. You could look at reactive oxygen species production as one. You could look at their shapes as one. You could look at how well they move around the cell because they move all the time. How well are they moving? Are they static or are they actually able to move? You could look at how well they're undergoing mitogenesis, creation of new ones, and how many of them are junky and old, and how impaired is mitophagy, the removal of them. So I guess I look at all these different parameters, and it's all a big picture as to how you put them together to create the health of the mitochondria. It's not just one or two of the parameters.
Yeah,
So
sure.
I don't know much about that single pathway, but I would always try to look at multiple parameters of mitochondria function and activity and so on. Yeah.
That's interesting. I never actually thought about the widespread actions of the mitochondria, and that there can be a number of different effects, which would be pretty hard to see, right? It's certainly in human beings. All you see is the net effect of improved metabolic health.
Yeah, I think one of the things with mitochondria is that they 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 fundamentally convert and produce energy. It's much easier to think about structures in one's brain than it is about flows of energy flow throughout the body.
Mm,
And when people start talking about energy, a lot of people think, oh, that's kind of corny, but really mitochondria are, they are a structural thing, but they are changing and creating energy in different parts of the body, and they're talking to each other, and they behave individually, but they also behave as a cohesive unit. So like a school of fish is the classic example. You can understand how a fish works, but that doesn't tell you how a school of fish works, how it
right.
moves. So there's something, like you say, 1 + 1 does not equal 2. There are emergent factors that are created when mitochondria work together as a group. And I don't think we understand those very well at all. And this is
Mm.
probably where, this may well contribute to a lot of brain behaviors, such as awareness and consciousness and so on. So,
Yeah, interesting. It is certainly a new frontier, isn't it? In medicine, is really looking at the role of the mitochondria in our overall
I think so,
metabolism.
yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah, I think
and
we focus on the cell too much probably, but
hmm. Matt, this has been absolutely awesome. You are definitely at the bleeding edge of science, which I think is where any self-respecting scientist and clinician actually wants to be.
hope so.
So that must be very, very cool. But on behalf of the human race, I would like to thank you for just forwarding our knowledge of science. Just that little bit, and hopefully then others pick up on your work and we start to get a more complete picture. Now, your website has got a shitload of stuff that people can actually access. Is that the best place for people to go if they want to find out more?
Yes, metabolicneurologist.com is the best because I put all our important studies there. And most of the podcasts and things are there too. So, when this one comes out, it'll go on there. And people can contact me if they have any questions about the work through that site too. So, and a patient started that site for me.
Oh,
The
cool.
young woman, yeah, the young woman with the thymoma, actually, she was a website designer, so she started it, and now I just add to it. So everything there is authentic. It's not filtered.
Yeah. And there's a wide range of stuff. There's a bunch of research papers. There's a whole heap
Yeah,
of talks by you as well. There's case studies, and then you've even education for health professionals and clinicians, which I certainly bookmarked a couple of those things to go into and geek out on. So I think there's a wide range of resources for both individuals and anybody who's a health professional to just go in. But yeah, mate, keep doing what you're doing and keep popping it up on the website. And and keep moving science forward.
Thanks, Paul.
Awesome. Thank you.